Disney princess stories are always magical fairy tales that promise us a happy ending. But if we take a closer look at the real stories behind these fairy tales, we'll discover a much harsher reality, one that's very far from the world of childhood dreams. And after watching this video, you probably won't see these cartoons the same way again. Don't believe it? Leave a like and let's dive in. Cinderella is probably one of the most famous fairy tales in the world. According to folklorists, there are at least 345 different versions of this story, and possibly as many as 1,500. Versions of Cinderella exist in almost every culture. Of course, the characters may have different names, and the plot may change slightly, but the core of the story always remains the same. A poor girl who is mistreated by everyone around her eventually marries successfully, not without a little help from magic and a shoe. But did you know that the very first version of this story actually came from ancient Egypt, and may even have been based on a real historical figure? Unexpected, right? The story was recorded at the end of the 1st century by the Greek geographer Strabo. Of course, his version is somewhat different from the one we know from Disney, but shoes still play a very important role in it. So how did this earliest version of the tale go? A beautiful servant girl named Rhodopis was bathing in the Nile when suddenly an eagle swooped down, grabbed one of her sandals and flew away with it. As the bird passed over the palace of the king in Memphis, it dropped the sandal straight into the king's lap. The king was amazed by the delicate shape of the sandal and took it as a sign from the gods. He ordered that the owner of the sandal be found, and when the girl was finally discovered, she was brought to the king and eventually became his wife. The Rhodopis from this story was actually based on a real woman. She was one of the most famous courtesans of the ancient world and had the nickname Rosy Cheeks. She lived around the 6th century BC. She never actually became a queen, but she was bought out of slavery by a wealthy patron, who, interestingly enough, was the brother of the famous poet Sappho. Thanks to Sappho, some details of this story have survived to our time. The version of Cinderella that later inspired the Disney film, the one that is now considered the classic version, was written by Charles Perrault in 1697. It was Perrault who introduced the glass slipper, the pumpkin carriage, and the fairy godmother. And his version of the story is probably the kindest and most child-friendly of them all. As I mentioned earlier, almost every culture has its own version of Cinderella, and sometimes these versions feel more like horror stories than bedtime tales for children. For example, in the German version written by the Brothers Grimm, Cinderella's stepsisters are punished at the end when doves peck out their eyes. In a Chinese version of the story, the stepmother and stepsister die in a rock slide. And in one Korean version, Cinderella actually orders the death of her stepsister, and her body is served to the stepmother as a meal. So if you want to protect your own psyche and the psyche of your children, it might be better to stick to the classic version of Cinderella. But if you're curious enough to dive into these truly strange stories, there's even a book written back in 1893 by a folklorist called Cinderella, 345 Variants of Cinderella. And by the way, I know that people from many different countries are watching this video. If your culture has its own version of Cinderella, write about it in the comments. I would love to read about it. It's incredibly interesting. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair! This was the phrase I always remembered while brushing my hair as a little girl. Back then, the Disney movie hadn't even been released yet, but of course, all of us already knew the story thanks to the fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. Although, when it comes to the authorship of this story, there's a rather awkward detail. Some literary scholars claim that the version the Brothers Grimm published in 1812 was actually borrowed from Friedrich Schultz, who had released his own version back in 1790. Schultz, in turn, may have taken the idea from the French writer Charlotte Rose de Caumont de la Force and her fairy tale written in 1698. And she herself seems to have borrowed the plot from the Italian writer Giambattista Basile, who in 1634 wrote a story called Petronella. So finding the true author of Rapunzel is almost as difficult as counting all the versions of Cinderella. But the more interesting question is this: could the story of the long-haired beauty locked in a tower have been inspired by a real historical figure? Some researchers believe that the tale may have been inspired by Saint Barbara, who lived around the 3rd century. Barbara's father, a pagan named Dioscorus, was a wealthy and influential man in the Phoenician city of Heliopolis. After being widowed at a young age, he devoted himself entirely to raising his daughter. He loved her so much that he decided to keep her hidden, away from the outside world. To do this, he built a tower where she grew up, surrounded only by a very small circle of women and teachers. But as the girl grew older, rumours about her beauty began to spread throughout the city, and many suitors started asking for her hand in marriage. Her father, however, believed that his daughter deserved nothing less than becoming the wife of an emperor. Barbara herself had no desire to marry. So her father decided that perhaps she simply needed friends, and that she should meet other young women who could tell her about the advantages of marriage and life in society. He began taking her out into the city more often and introducing her to the social world. But once she gained a little freedom, Barbara met Christian women, and the teachings of Christianity impressed her so deeply that she secretly converted and was baptized. When her father discovered that his daughter had become a Christian, he was furious. A devoted pagan, he despised Christians and considered them enemies of the Roman Empire, and in that moment his hatred proved stronger than his love for his own child. Barbara was subjected to cruel torture, but she refused to renounce her faith. In the end, her father decided to become her executioner himself and beheaded her with a sword. Later, the church began to venerate her as a saint. Of course, apart from the tower and the beauty of the main character, there isn't much in this story that directly connects it to the fairy tale of Rapunzel. But I still think that stories like this could very well have inspired writers of that time, especially considering how deeply religious people were back then, and how well known the story of St. Barbara was. But what do you think? Who might have inspired the authors of this famous story? Now, the next Disney heroine is actually not very loved in her homeland, China, and of course, we're talking about Mulan. For many Chinese viewers, the Disney version of the famous Ballad of Mulan, which was written in the 6th century, unfortunately didn't feel quite right. Many people felt that it didn't truly reflect Chinese history and culture, even though the general plot was kept. The main difference is that in the original ballad there was no love story at all. The girl simply went to serve in the army in place of her father, and after many years returned home. Only then did she reveal the truth about herself, that she was actually a woman. Most historians believe that Mulan herself is a fictional character of folklore. However, she may well have been inspired by real Chinese women warriors. For example, one of the most fascinating figures in Chinese history is Fu Hao, who lived in the 13th century BC and is considered the first female general in Chinese history. Fu Hao was one of the 64 wives of Emperor Wu Ding, but judging by historical records, she was clearly his favourite. Perhaps that is the only explanation for why he allowed her something that was almost unthinkable at the time: to lead an army into battle. Fu Hao once appeared before her husband dressed in full battle armour and asked for permission to go to war. Since childhood, she had been trained in martial arts by her family and was not afraid of the battlefield. At first, the emperor was surprised by her request, but the court astrologers and diviners also advised him that this decision would bring victory. They predicted success in battle. Her army consisted entirely of volunteers, and she managed to gather around 13,000 soldiers. Just imagine what a sensation that must have been. Thousands of men willing to follow a woman into battle. And interestingly, her forces were not made up only of men. When her tomb was discovered in the 1970s, archaeologists found evidence suggesting that around 600 women also served under her command. So she was far from being the only female warrior. During her military career, Fu Hao led several large campaigns and won many victories. Her success was so great that even after her early death, Later, generals continued to invoke her spirit, hoping to gain luck in battle. So, don't believe anyone who tells you that throughout history, the only role of women was to get married and have children. I think the truth is simply that we still know far too little, and many more stories about brave women warriors are still waiting to be discovered. And I'd like to finish this story with a few very wise lines from the Ballad of Mulan. The male hare has heavy front paws. The female hare tends to squint, but when the two hares run side by side, how can you tell the female from the male? Moana is one of the newer Disney heroines, and she stands out dramatically from many of the other princesses whose stories usually revolve around love. Her story is about a brave girl who sets out on a journey to save her people. And in the history of Polynesia, there was also a girl somewhat like her, Princess Kailani, the last heir to the Hawaiian throne. At birth, she was given a very long name that I would probably struggle to pronounce, but among her many names was also the name Victoria, in honor of Queen Victoria, whose support once helped the small Hawaiian kingdom maintain its independence. The background of the princess's parents is also quite interesting. Her father was a Scottish businessman, while her mother was a Hawaiian princess by birth. That is what allowed young Kailani to become fourth in line to the throne. Kailani's childhood was quite happy. Her father built a luxurious home for the family. Instead of candles, the house already had electricity, which, by the way, appeared there even earlier than in the White House. And as a child, the girl's favorite companions were turtles and peacocks. But happiness cannot last forever. When the girl was 11 years old, her mother died. At the age of 13, Kailani was sent to study in Britain, where it was believed that a European education would better prepare her for her future role as queen. But when she was only 17, everything suddenly changed. A revolution broke out in Hawaii, and the United States, taking advantage of the situation, effectively annexed the islands. The young princess bravely traveled to the United States, hoping to convince President Grover Cleveland and the American Congress not to strip Hawaii of its independence. When the ship carrying her arrived, many people expected to see a savage. Instead, they saw a beautiful, educated young princess. Kailani began giving public speeches, criticizing the American government for its unfair treatment of the Hawaiian people. She traveled across many states, worked tirelessly hoping that Americans would understand the situation of her homeland. But her pleas went unheard. In 1897, Congress voted for the annexation of Hawaii by the United States. On the day Hawaii was officially annexed, the princess said, "It was hard to lose the throne, but it was even harder to see our flag lowered." She was devastated, but even then, she refused to abandon her people. During the following year, Kailani and her aunt continued fighting to convince the American government at least to expand the rights of the native population of the islands. But the princess's health turned out to be more fragile than her spirit and her determination to fight for her homeland. She died at the age of just 23 from inflammatory rheumatism. Her final words were, "I have lived a very strange life, but a very romantic one." And it seems to me that even if the connection is not direct, Kailani and Moana still share something in common. A deep love for the ocean, for their homeland, for their people, and the courage to stand up for them. Disney princesses and fairy tales gave many of us a happy childhood. They became a part of who we are. But real life and real history can be even more fascinating, and the stories of real women are just as dramatic, remarkable, and inspiring. If you know other real people who may have inspired Disney stories, tell me about them in the comments. Perhaps together we'll discover enough stories for a third part. If you enjoyed this video, please support my channel with a like. It takes just a second for you, but it really helps my work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.